Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Bay Nature Talk. Thank you all for making time to join today and join at your lunchtime. My name is Leah Keener, and I'm Bay Nature's events coordinator. Bay Nature, for those of you who don't know, is a quarterly print publication that focuses on nature and conservation topics local to the Bay Area. In addition, we have weekly digital content that gets published on our website every week. That's usually very newsy and related to nature, events, and news, also local to the Bay Area. Um, but in addition to our publication and our online editorial content, we have a number of in-person and virtual events that are available to audience members to join in and take part in. We have our virtual talk series like this one, and we also have our in-person hike, BioBlitz, and other outing series that brings us to different places around the Bay Area. So please, I encourage you to take a look at those events offerings as well as our editorial content. And just really thank you all for making time and being interested in our program. But without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker and our presenter today for our talk all about sharks and shark diversity along the California coast. We're going to be joined today by David McGuire from Shark Stewards, who's here with us in our Zoom meeting today. And David is the founder of Shark Stewards, which is a nonprofit whose mission is to save endangered sharks and rays from overfishing and the shark fin trade, as well as protect critical marine habitat through the establishment of marine protected areas. He has worked for more than a decade in the Department of Integrative Biology at UC Berkeley and is a research associate of the Department of Aquatic Biology at the California Academy of Sciences, where he conducts shark research program looking into shark population studies, movements, and fisheries impact. David also teaches marine protection policy and marine ecology at the College of Marin and is an advisor at the Fung Institute of UC Berkeley. So thank you so much, David, for joining us today. We're really lucky to have you. Thank you for sharing your expertise and knowledge, and we'll turn it over to you now to present.
Great. Thank you, Leah and Bay Nature. Great to be with you. I definitely admire the publication and now the growth of Bay Nature out into the field and this really great lecture series. And it's really my pleasure to join you. Yeah, the bio, I'm not sure that there's a Department of Aquatic Biology anymore. That's a little old. That was with Dr. John McCosker. So hopefully I'm an associate in ichthyology since John retired. And I used to work at Berkeley, but I founded Shark Stewards about almost 20 years ago, but I still am associated and really happy to still be advising students at Cal. And I'll talk a little bit about a project today that we're working on in the Bay Area on local sharks. So we are a nonprofit. We're part of the Earth Island Institute right across from campus in Berkeley. We're a nonprofit working in applying science and education towards policy and advocacy to protect sharks from overfishing, the wildlife trade, particularly the fin trade, and protect critical marine habitat. That essentially sums up our mission. So protecting sharks and where they live. And I'll be happy to share how we do that. And really what we want to talk about today, though, is California shark diversity. I'm an underwater filmmaker. I'm not going to talk about white sharks very much. Those are the ones that garner our attention and the attention of the news, of course, because they are charismatic and magnificent. But they are protected now after over 25 years. That population is recovering. It is one of the best studied sharks along our coast. Fascinating science that's being conducted by Stanford's top program, Sal Jorgensen, Paul Knive, and Scott Anderson. There's a whole talk, so I'm sure, available, and maybe somebody's already given one to Bay Nature on white sharks. I want to talk about shark diversity and how cool sharks are and how diverse their morphology, their ecosystem function, their biological diversity as a group, and their role in marine ecosystems. Particularly, I'll focus around the San Francisco Bay Estuary and California nearshore environment because that's more relevant perhaps to Bay Nature. These are all sharks that live in our California coastal waters, from the largest, the basking shark, to the next largest, the white shark. all the way down to not on here, the pygmy shark or the lantern shark and some of the cat sharks that live in the deep sea off the continental shelf, which is not very far offshore, just about 5 miles past the Farallon Islands, or about 32 miles offshore. We have additional diversity of elasmobranchs, which is the group of sharks, the subclass of chondrichthyan fish, of which sharks are. So I do teach at the College of Marin and Marine Policy, but I also do a lot of guest lecturing in schools and talk to kids. And the big question as we go around the room is, what is a shark? I won't ask you that, but we all have different conceptions and perceptions of what a shark is, and a lot of those are provided to us by Shark Week. And Jaws was really one of the big films, and great book by Peter Benchley, coming up on 50 years next year, if you can believe it. That really terrified people and magnified this sense that sharks are man-eaters, that they're women eaters, they don't discriminate, that they're terrifying beasts that are lurking out there to eat us. And actually, we know that's not the case. And in particular, there's far fewer of them than there used to be, particularly thanks to the backlash from Jaws, because of vendetta killings, but also because of habitat loss and direct fishing in commercial fisheries in the 70s and 80s in California, including Half Moon Bay and Santa Barbara, where I did my undergraduate work. And we used to see white sharks landed, and that population in the Northeast Pacific was nearly wiped out and has been protected here in California since 1993, and it is just recovering. It is not fully recovered. But enough about white sharks. The group of sharks is the class Chondrichthyes, the subclasses Elasmobranch and Holocephalin, or the ghost sharks. And they are identified by having between 5 and 7 external gills. Of course, they are fish. They're not mammals, although many species are endothermic, like mammals. They have specialized scales called denticles, which are actually made of dentin, which are different from fish. That gives them laminar flow. It prevents biofouling. It's a really amazing adaptation. They have large rigid fins, which work very well for their mobility, particularly in the laminid or the real fast-moving sharks, which actually has worked against them in more modern years because of the trade in shark fin, because those fins are supported by cartilage. And they physically reproduce rather than spawn eggs. So they actually make much more like a mammal. They copulate, which is very unusual in the fish world. And some even give live birth, or many give live birth, but some lay eggs. And they don't have a bladder. They have an enlarged liver, which is their storage organ, that stores fats and lipids, and it helps them float. But it also is sort of their battery, especially for the large migratory sharks, like the white sharks, that feed off the Farallons or Point Reyes or Año Nuevo and bulk up sometimes as much as 1/3 of their weight before they go off in this amazing migration, which is a whole nother lecture. So this is the taxonomic, the phylogeny and the family tree. And those are the two large subclasses on the left. And you can see evolutionarily and geologic time that there was a long split hundreds of millions of years ago between the holocephalins, or the chimera, or also called ghost fish or rabbit fish, and the elasmobranchs, which actually radiated, particularly after the Miocene. There are now 8 extant families, and they're sort of split into the Galleiforms and Squaleiforms. There are different groupings of sharks, but the species would be up here at the top. Lamniforms are what the white sharks are in. Squaliforms are the dogfish. And then over here, the batoids and the rajoforms, which are the largest group of what we call the flat sharks. So in all, this group of elasmobranchs are around 12 to 1,300 species, and about 520 or 30 in what we consider the sharky sharks. And most of the other group are the batoids. And then there are about 50 species in the chimera or the ratfish. And we're discovering more all the time, particularly Dr. Dave Ebert at Moss Landing Marine Lab, and he's called the lost shark guy, and he was at Moss Landing when I actually studied there. And he's definitely been has named many species of new sharks, particularly recently a new ratfish off of our own coastline. So this is a page out of a book I wrote during COVID called, it's a science book, Sharks for Kids, but essentially it just shows the diversity of shark size, their specializations, their organs. Sharks are highly specialized as a lineage. They've been around for around 420 million years, survived 5 great extinction events, and many of these sharks, particularly the holocephalans, probably look very much like the primitive sharks hundreds or 200 million years ago. Slow moving, fairly flaccid, benthic, but they have their own specializations. They have evolved. Sharks have changed. They don't look like they did 100 million years ago or 50 million years ago in many cases. So they are adapting, but they are consummately they are evolving, but they are consummately adapted. They are highly specialized, particularly the laminate sharks, which we know are more familiar with, like the mako shark, like the white shark, fast swimming, big fins, maneuverable, predatory, big teeth, large, fairly complex eyes. They have a disarticulated skull, which allows them to open their jaws wider. Of course, they have rigid gills and gill structures for oxygen exchange, a large liver for storage, as I mentioned. And in this case, a male would have claspers here, would be their male reproductive organ. They have many vertebrae, unlike, what do we have, 33, over 134 in a white shark, which makes them light and maneuverable. And that skeleton is what distinguishes what is a shark, with some exceptions in the fish world through convergent evolution, but they have a cartilaginous skeleton, which makes them very flexible and it helps make them lighter than bone. And there are many, many other adaptations. And in particular, I talked about the reproductive tract, which is much more sophisticated. Their reproduction, they do not spawn. They don't, like a salmon, lay out hundreds of thousands or millions of eggs and milk. And the two, luckily, or hope with hope, will join and form embryo. And most of those, of course, will die or get eaten or not inseminate the egg at all, or fertilize the egg at all, that is. But also, the males have these special adapted claspers. That's a fin that can transmit the sperm, and the females have these anal fins. Sorry. And so sharks are easy to sex, which is really great for biologists because it also means you don't really have to kill the shark. You can identify the shark underwater through photography, or if you catch it, look at it, identify it. If you're a scientist, tag it, take fluids, but you can automatically determine what the sex is, which is really nice in the fish world because a lot of fish look just like each other, the sexes do. So that's another unique thing, a very unique thing about sharks. Some sharks have they have a dual, the females have a dual reproductive tract, so 2 uteri. These sharks have a very diverse reproductive strategy. I did talk a little bit about, or mentioned endothermy. The more sophisticated sharks in the Laminidae have this heat capture system that is a result of this sophisticated capillary exchange, which is much like a radiator. It's a heat exchanger. It's called the rete miriable, and it captures that warm blood that's heated by the muscles before it goes out to the extremities and returns that to the heart and the brain. And that gives them better sensory capability, particularly in water that's colder than their body temperature, or even in very cold waters, such as where the Greenland sharks lives, which is near freezing. I had mentioned that some fish besides sharks also have cartilaginous skeletons. That's known as convergent evolution. The bony fish and the cartilaginous fish separated a long time ago, hundreds of millions of years ago, and particularly the bony fish radiated in the last extinction event, post-Miocene. But there are some fish that have cartilaginous skeletons that are not sharks, very few. Likewise, with endothermy, like the tuna and the swordfish, they're not closely related to sharks at all, but they have this similar adaptation, which helps them keep their core warmer. And this is a cross section of a bluefin tuna, and they capture that tuna. And again, you'll see that flow goes towards the brain, towards the eyes, towards the sensory organs. Reproduction, sharks actually have sex that's rough and short and sometimes brutal. It's like the poet Hobbes' disgust of life. Some are viviparous. Some are placental, some are aplacental. For example, like a blue shark, and their pups are born alive, fully developed. They do not nurse, they do not stay around their mothers. They actually swim away as quickly as possible from their cousins. And most sharks are actually ovoviparous, which is kind of a they lay eggs internally. And I mentioned two uteri, for example, the spiny dogfish or the tiger shark. So there's sort of like a cascade of developing embryos, and those eggs will hatch internally. And in some cases, for example, with the tiger sharks, they will either practice oophagy, eat other eggs of their womb mates, or cannibalism, intrauterine cannibalism. And those sharks that are born are much more robust, healthy, and stronger than they would be otherwise. So you want to come first, I guess, in some of the shark world if you're ovoviparous. And then the oviparous, or egg layers, are also a large group. Particularly, many of the batoids are oviparous. The holocephalans, or the chimera, are also oviparous. And then some of the other sharks, like the swell sharks, also lay an egg case. And if you're a beach walker, you might find their egg case washed up on the beach, and they're called mermaids' purses. And they have these little tendrils here that will catch in the kelp or in the rocky subtidal until that little embryo develops and the shark comes out again, fully formed, much like a chicken. So here's an embryo living off of the yolk. So sharks are pretty amazing reproductively, very unique, that sort of diversity in a lineage. They have very many highly sensitive organs and highly specialized. This is a diagram from the book. Again, they rely on hearing, but also sensation, vibration through their lateral line. Sharks can smell well over a quarter mile. Some scientists have speculated as much as a mile, tasting the scent trail of a dead whale or blood. Many sharks have excellent sight. Sharks see contrast better than most are colorblind, if you will, but they do see a contrast of dark and light, and also sharks will detect shapes. That's what we think with white sharks. They rely on ambush predation. They skylight their prey, their seal, against the light, and sometimes mistakenly a surfer. And then they also, finally, the closest is the ampullae of Lorenzini, which is on their rostrum or their snout. And this is a very sophisticated network of electromagnetic sensors that are attached to a network of neurons and nerves back to the brain that detect electromagnetic sensations, so heartbeats or muscular movements. And sharks will actually do this kind of sweeping pattern both visually, but also through vibration. But when they're within a meter or so, or maybe 3 meters, 10 feet, they'll use this electromagnetic sense to home in on their prey. And this is particularly helpful in low light situations like the deep sea where many sharks live. or in the San Francisco Bay where it's really muddy. Many sharks have highly specialized dentition. They're not all sharp, jaggedy teeth. Some are crushing, like the bat rays that consume primarily crustaceans and clams and crush their prey. Of course, they're benthic feeders. Others have a small tooth like in this case, the leopard shark, where they're more of a grasping. Some shark teeth are like or like saws, that is. Some are like dinner knives. And this is how we distinguish, and I have identified sharks evolutionarily because of that cartilaginous skeleton. Does not fossilize well. And so sharks leave a really good tooth record because of that dentin. In some cases, the jaws, which are also impregnated with crystals that give them more of a bone-like structure. So natural historians describe many species of sharks that we've never seen or they had not seen at the time, like Linnaeus, by their jaws, and did monographs. And in some cases, like Megachasma, like Megamouth, it was described in the 1800s. It was filed as a note at the British Museum of Natural History. And then the shark was fished up in the 1970s off of Hawaii on the end of an anchor. And somebody looked at the jaws, described the whole fish because it's the first time we'd ever had a specimen. And they went back into the record, and lo and behold, somebody had described this shark as extinct because they'd never seen the specimen. So unlike the dinosaurs, which leave a very excellent fossil record, sharks don't leave a very good fossil record. And there's a lot of speculation. And we draw the shark, which much like has been done with Megalodon, which has been, in some cases, pictified as a giant great white shark, 60 feet long, when in the case it probably had a much different morphology that has been described or speculated more recently. So again, this is a great way to understand not only the species, but also what it eats. So here in this frame is a seven-gill shark. This is called heterodonty. Their teeth are not symmetrical between their upper jaw and their lower jaw. And in this case, they have these little pointers that can grab the fish, and then these more saw-like structures on the bottom part of the jaw that can actually tear their seal or fish, and that's why sharks do that shaking motion. Mako sharks are entirely different. They have these really sharp pincers, and the top teeth have kind of this cutting edge. So they will penetrate. They'll very fast swimmers. They'll swim after a tuna and penetrate, and the teeth are sloped backwards and bite off a chunk of their prey. So going into shark diversity, of course, the white sharks, large, robust body. They are endothermic poikilotherms, they're called, so they're warm-blooded, or at least their temperature is warmer than ambient. I think we're fairly familiar with this animal. They are fascinating, and there are a lot of great scientists out there, like John McCosker and more recent scientists. The salmon shark has a very similar body type, fusiform, like a torpedo, if you will. Large, robust fins. In this case, this guy has quite a few copepods, parasitic copepods trailing on it. But they are different. Quite often, they are mistaken for a white shark juvenile. Until recent years, there were no young white sharks off of our coastline. That changed with the advent of the warm sea surface temperatures, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But they look a lot like a white shark, but they're not as robust. And these sharks migrate up coast all the way up to Alaska, and they feed on salmon. They don't eat marine mammals, but they do have a very similar morphology. But you can tell from the dorsal fin, which is much more rounded. The fastest swimming shark, the mako, which lives offshore, and we're seeing it shift its range northward over the past decade or 2 decades or so. Fast swimming follows albacore and yellowfin and bluefin tuna, subtropical all the way into the temperate zone, out into the pelagic zone, but they do appear off of our continental shelf primarily, sometimes in the Gulf of the Farallones. Same with the blue shark, which is more of our summer shark, and we see these at the surface. Growing up, I used to see these off the Santa Barbara coastline between the Channel Islands to go out diving all the time. They were one of the most abundant sharks, at least pelagic or open ocean shark off our coastline. Now they're being fished at the rate of around 20 million a year, and their population has declined dramatically, driven largely by the shark fin trade, but quite often is for fertilizer and also uh, ignominiously as cat food. Thresher sharks, which there are three species, including the common, the big eye, and the pelagic. And they have this big upper caudal that they use as like a whip, like a bull whip that will smack the water and create a compression wave, but also have physical contact. These sharks come up and give birth off our coastline in the summer. We see them leaping out of the San Francisco Bay and the Gulf of the Farallones. They're a highly acrobatic shark. We see juveniles come into the bay. Basking sharks, which are the largest shark, and they are a filter feeder like the whale shark. They are a very large shark, over 40 feet long. Typically, they are spotted off Monterey in small groups. They are critically endangered. They've been overfished globally. They're a very gentle, slow moving shark, planktivores, so they eat fish larvae and plankton, small invertebrates, and they are protected under Appendix 2, and hopefully we will be able to protect them off of our coastline, but they do migrate. They are a long-lived species, and they were killed for their livers, for oil in the 40s, the 30s, and 40s. Also as meat. Some native peoples would eat these, but also as bycatch. The frilled shark, which is a really weird shark, Clematisolacius anguinus, or eel-like. This is in the Hexanchidae, or the six-gilled shark family, which also includes seven-gill sharks. And as I said, most sharks have five. These are a deep sea shark that will vertically migrate. They will come up to the continental shelf out by the Farallon Islands at night. They are a rare species. Only a few have been ever captured and observed in captivity, especially off of Japan. Typically, they live thousands of feet deep. And they have this large, sophisticated eye that is really adapted to low light that has a special membrane, the tapetum lucidium, which reflects the light back to the receptors. And this is a similar mechanism that cats have or deer have, and that's what you get the eye shine when you see the deer in the headlights. That's that reflection going on. And so they're adapted to low light, really a weird shark. Prickly sharks, again, another deep sea shark, but it'll come in even close to shore off Southern California. We were very surprised to see recreational fishermen landing these at night. They're a very slow moving shark with a really, really rough skin. But they also live off the continental shelf and will come up into more shallow waters, but typically not in what we consider the photic zone of around 300 feet or so. Another fairly deeper water shark that does come into the San Francisco Bay has this really specialized coloration, which is useful in identification. This is the broad-nosed seven-gill. They are a hexanchiform shark that also lives or coexists, I should say, evolutionarily with their cousins. The six-gill sharks, there are only 4 species in 2 genera. There are only 2 species of the seven-gills, and in this case, the broad-nosed lives off our coast. They're a fairly basal species that have been around for a couple 100 million years as a lineage, slow-moving. They have this big, beautiful eye. They're kind of always smiling. And we started to do a tagging study with the California Academy of Sciences and Monterey Aquarium. And we're looking at coastal movements and found that the sharks that are born here in the bay that are pupped end up all the way up to British Columbia and all the way down to Mexico. They do divide out by cohort. The females will go north and the males I'm sorry, the females will go south like this one, and the males will go north. This shark was tagged in the San Francisco Bay, and about 9 months later, uh, the tag's not in the photograph, but we were able to identify it. And now with an algorithm, it's called eShark. Now you can photo ID and pattern match. And so we've had a community science study with another nonprofit called Ocean Sanctuaries, and looking at these species by borrowing photographs from underwater photographers. So it's a great way to understand sharks, to share the knowledge of sharks, to observe sharks with actually not creating harm or damage to them by fishing or inserting an invasive tag. The cousin, the six-gill shark, which is typically a deeper water shark. They live down off the Cordell Bank, thousands of feet deep. Uh, but these also come into the San Francisco Bay and live in the deeper water. And they're a really large, slow-moving, but predatory shark that we see come into the mouth of the San Francisco Bay. We don't think they go into the shallows. They may be following their prey. They're down there a couple 100 feet deep or off the Cavallo Spire, which is near the Golden Gate Bridge, which attracts a lot of species, including marine mammals like the harbor porpoise, sea lions, but other species of shark. I could keep going, but the hound shark, which is the largest family Triacidae that's represented of the free-swimming sharks here, are the fast-swimming sharks, the leopard shark, and the unfortunately named soup fin shark, Galeas galerinus, which is also called a tope shark or a school shark. These sharks end up down in San Diego as well. These sharks use the San Francisco Bay as nursery and pupping habitat, as do the brown and the gray smoothhounds. More typically, they're benthic sharks, and they will give live birth in the shallows in sort of the wetland areas, Richardson Bay, Paradise Cove, back in San Leandro, Redwood City, anywhere where there's really nice eelgrass beds, Point Molate, or where there's warm, protected habitat that has some decent foraging grounds. The spiny dogfish is a large schooling shark. It's a big commercially fished shark up north off of British Columbia and the East Coast, but we don't fish it commercially. Fishermen curse them because they get caught in their fishing gear, their nets in particular, because they have these two spines forward of their two dorsal fins. Really a beautiful shark that can live in deep waters, but can also come into the bay. Again, I'd like to see the leopard shark, which is such a gorgeous shark and lives in the bay, but also out in the kelp beds and the rocky subtidal as our state shark, because they are really identifiable. They're gentle, they're beautiful, but in a way, they're also kind of the canary of ocean contamination or harmful algal blooms. The Pacific horn shark lives in the more the rocky subtidal. They can live around the headlands. They are also the egg layers. And as I said, the swell shark, and there's that swell shark egg case, they prefer the rocky habitat, but will forage in some sandy and silty soft bottom habitat. And then the angel shark, the squantiniform, this was a very common shark that supported a commercial fishery for decades off of Bodega Bay, off Santa Barbara, Half Moon Bay, until it was overfished. These sharks are endangered globally. There are about 7 species. They're considered a good eating shark. They are benthic and they're really easy to catch, apparently. They're really amazing. They're well camouflaged. They practice ambush predation, but also can be active nocturnal foragers. And then sort of the transitional morphotypes, the spiny guitarfish is shark-looking, but the pectoral fins are semi-fused with the other rays, like the stingrays. They're completely fused, but this is a ray, and it has a more slender body type. But this is a benthic shark, as well as the thornback guitarfish, which has a completely fused or almost completely fused pectoral fins. These are also a guitarfish that lives in the San Francisco Bay. The star really is the bat ray that actually flies around and bioturbates the benthic habitat. It lives in shallow, sometimes low oxygen environments, and it provides a service by bioturbating, by generating oxygen into the sediments when they're out there foraging for their crabs or crustaceans or clams that are living in the benthos. Very important fish in soft bottom habitat. And then the stingray, the round stingray Urabatus, also comes in the bay, and it does have a little stinger, as does the bat ray at the on the end, just forward of the tail or the caudal. And if you step on that, it'll whip it up and it'll give you a venomous sting, which is actually quite painful. And then the California torpedo ray, we've seen these come into Richardson Bay, and they can deliver an electric volt, and they will actually arch their pectoral fins and create this current that will shock their prey. They can deliver a very significant shock of up to 100 volts that can be quite shocking to humans too. And if you have a heart condition, it might potentially be fatal, but it's certainly something you don't want to experience. They're also very easily identifiable through their coloration. So if you see something like this, if you catch it on a line, be very careful getting it off. And the big skate, and the skates are a different group of batoids that, again, have fully attached cephalic fins, and they are benthic. They have a little bit more of a pointy nose. These are the only elasmobranch that I know that have more embryos than one. So they can have as many as 4 embryos in one egg case, and it's actually the largest off of our coast, bigger than a fist. And these are typically laid off the continental shelf, but they will come into the bays and estuaries and forage. And then last but not least, the chimera, which if you ever see one in the wild, you are extremely fortunate. Again, the family tree down here, they split off a long time ago, or were split off from, I should say. And this is the spotted ratfish, Hydrolagus kallii. And there's a new one that Dr. Ebert was part of the description with the mbari just a couple of years ago, or a few years ago. Hydrolagus trotii, I believe it is trotii. And this was discovered by one of the deep sea ROVs at MBARI, or Monterey Bay Area Research Institute, operates off of Moss Landing in the canyon. Dr. Ebert has discovered, I don't know how many, 10, 15 different species of ratfish or rabbitfish. They are slow moving, they're very basal, they eat on whale fall, the detritus at the deep sea. They live a solitary or a sub-solitary lifestyle, but as something falls, it's this mana that comes down from the surface that they all aggregate and have this incredible movable feast along with hagfish and a few other species. And then when that whale or animal is completely consumed, they drift off into the darkness again. Really fascinating group of elasmobranch. We have very little information about them. Slow growing, probably long lived, late onset of reproduction, and not high reproductive capacity because they live in very cold or deep waters. You can go on our website. We have science sheets, including conservation sheets that we use in our conservation work at CITES, the Convention of International Trade of Endangered Species, but also about many local species that you can download. And these are going to be hopefully consolidated into a new guide that I'm publishing through Heyday with some other information on sharks of the bays, the estuaries, and our national marine sanctuaries. And I hope that that will come out in 2025. A big part of our program is community science. I'm one of the co-chairs of the California Golden Gate MPA Collaborative. We work with the MPA Watch program, with the California Academy of Sciences, with Western Marin Environmental Action Committee on the marine protected areas, but also educating people as well as gathering data through observations and entering them through apps on smartphones. We also do direct observations, including dead sharks, collecting data through these large morbidity events that we've experienced, at least 3 large ones in the last 5 years, with hundreds of elasmobranchs washing up on our shorelines. And then we engage youth in plastic data collection while we're doing this. So they will actually collect data on fish, hopefully live fish that they see, sometimes dead fish, but also collecting data along beaches, including Aquatic Park in Berkeley, which is a new program that we started a few years ago after a very large shark and ray die-off that piqued my curiosity. We now have a water monitoring program with Cal Berkeley students looking at the different limnological or water qualities, or some of them chemical, some of them physical, to see what's going on in this enclosed water body and to hopefully restore the health of that water body, because we've seen juvenile leopard sharks in the Aquatic Park Cove, which is this man-made basin. And so this is a program that anybody can come down and help us do water collection or periodic cleanups along the shoreline, as well as looking at plastic pollution by manufacturer, which helps us identify sources of pollution and lean on them to increase a more clean and sustainable product flow. So we have had these harmful algal blooms. These are pictures that I took of, in this case, we are really focusing on the leopard sharks and looking at the pathology with California Fish and Wildlife. So collecting the brains of these zombie sharks and analyzing them for pathogens. In this case, it was a protozoa. In other cases, it has been a dinoflagellate. And there's Aquatic Park right there, which runs along the East Shore, Bayshore Freeway. This is all kind of part of our community science program called Shark Watch. Again, I mentioned the photo ID study. It's all volunteer. We have these signs along California in some of the surf shops and dive shops. And we're trying to engage people to take a photograph, download the app, and also take observations of human behavior, including shark catch by species. So we can get an idea of what sharks are being captured either legally, in the case of seven-gill sharks, but these are pregnant females in the San Francisco Bay, or this white shark, which was caught twice. This is a gaff mark from the first time. This shark probably died, but catch and release, and this is from social media. There was just a warning posted today at Huntington Beach where surfers saw 2 sharks that were aggressive that had been released, been cut. And so fishing recreationally can near shore, where recreational and public activity may increase risk of shark encounters. And this is something that we're trying to evaluate. And we did this through collecting data through Instagram and now TikTok on social media, looking at where fishermen are posting pictures of themselves holding a shark. We look at species, we look at location, and we're also identifying hotspots, as well as fishermen, quite a few are catching protected white sharks, which resulted in some new legislation 2 years ago. We're working with Cal State Long Beach, Dr. Chris Lowe. If you want to download that, there's a little link tree. You can test your shark knowledge, and there's a quiz on there, and it's also a way of being able to provide data to this large aggregate database, as well as the iNaturalist project with the Cal Academy. One of the more interesting phenomena that has occurred, and a lot of this has come through anecdotal community science data, particularly from a drone pilot called the Malibu Artist down off Padaro Lane or down off Santa Barbara. But we've seen a shift in the population of white sharks demographics from what were previously subadults and adults north of Point Conception, and the young of year, the newborns, and the juvenile sharks south of Point Conception, where there's a marked temperature break. Even though these sharks are endothermic, the smaller sharks do not have that surface to volume ratio, so they actually don't have as much heat retention. So they have kind of a threshold, a thermal threshold, and a thermal habitat range of around 55 degrees Fahrenheit. And if it gets colder, they typically don't venture down or north. until 2013, 2014, when the blob, the marine heat wave, hit off of the Northeast Pacific and endured through 2016, along with 2017, along with El Nino. This is a science paper that was published by Dr. Loeb, or I'm sorry, Van Houten. Oops, I just lost my thing. Oh, there it is, sorry. So this shows the Monterey Bay. This was a paper by the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and it shows where very, very rare before 2014, only one indication of a shark that had been tagged in the Monterey Bay Aquarium is right there on the peninsula. And then suddenly saw this influx, and now there's this population that's living off Capitola, off the cement ship, also down off Spanish Bay. And this is a new phenomenon associated, we believe, with climate change. And these sharks have shifted north in their range. This is not just white sharks, but this might have ramifications for public safety, perhaps. Who knows? Generally, white shark juveniles only eat rays and fish. And when they get to be subadults around 10 feet, they transfer to marine mammals. But there might be more encounters and interactions because young white sharks frequent nearshore environments, which are shallower and warmer. So this is kind of a new thing that is just happening, but we are seeing this off of Australia with reef sharks. We're seeing hybridization of shark species. It's not just sharks that are moving polewards as a result of climate change or sea surface temperatures, but this also affects the biota of the San Francisco Bay, not only through encroachment, more habitat if you're a fish, unless you're armoring or trying to hold those waters back. But it also changes the habitat structure when you have a difference in range of tide or a difference in sea levels as well as sea surface temperatures. So it's something to watch for, but if you want to see a shark, you can actually go out with a service out of Santa Cruz and see them from the surface. And you don't have to get into a cage or go surfing. So one of the reasons we are exploring sharks is to try to protect them from overfishing. 1/3 of all shark species are listed by the International Union for Conservation of Nature as threatened or endangered. And we've explored very little of our planet, and yet it's 71% of the Earth. Another 71% of oceanic sharks and rays have been fished out since the 1950s. And a large part of this is because not just habitat loss, but because of overfishing driven by the shark fin trade. So we work in policy. We introduce shark fin trade bans. We look at shark trade through Convention of International Trade of Endangered Species. We apply all these scientists' data towards advocacy and going to these commission meetings to try to reduce bycatch as well as retention, particularly of endangered sharks. Because why should we protect a shark? I mean, you may have heard about apex predators like wolves in the terrestrial environment. They structure the trophic levels beneath them. They are the regulators. They eat the sick, the stupid, and the slow, and they leave behind the smart, the quick, and the more reproductively successful. So they're architects of the DNA of their prey, which also can have a cascade effect on the trophic levels below if they are removed. Large sharks can also fix carbon. If you have a 5,000 pound great white shark that dies, it goes down to that biota in the benthic and maybe feed a chimera or some of the deep sea organisms, but that fixes that carbon so it doesn't go up into the atmosphere. And there's something that's just something called blue carbon. Uh, the food web is highly complex. It's not this simple, but not all sharks are apex predators. Many are mesopredators. Some are tertiary. Some are not predators at all. They live in the benthos. Like I said, the bat ray can bioturbate. They eat the dead or decaying material. And so it's a very complex system that needs all of its components from the bottom up and the top down, which is why we are really working on protecting habitat as well as species from overfishing. And it's really probably the best way we can protect species because of international fleets, because of IUU or illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing, which accounts for about 20% of all fishing globally. The US imports 90% of our seafood. That means 20% of that could be sharks that have been finned. fish that are overfished or fish that are endangered. So protecting where they live is critical, either through our national marine sanctuaries or our state network of marine protected areas. Our newest sanctuary is our first cultural heritage sanctuary, the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. Hopefully the Congress will pass it. And this will be I believe, our 15th National Marine Sanctuary, which protects really lands from extraction and oil drilling, which does a lot of help for habitat for birds and marine mammals and fish, as well as Native American culture because they have sacred sites down off Gaviota in this sanctuary in South Central California. We work in our network of California Marine Protected Areas. We just went through the decadal review or 10-year review. I co-chair one of the state collaboratives, and we are also engaging divers or citizen scientists to collect data with the Snapshot Cal Coast each June. With divers, we're doing the solstice sea star search this winter in December with the Cal Academy to try to look at, again, sea surface temperature and viral, or in this case, microbiome bacterial impacts on the solstice star, to look at recovery, to look at range, to look at impacts. But what we are seeing is that marine protected areas have more biodiversity. They are supporting life, more marketable species out of the marine protected areas, and they are more resilient than areas that are being impacted by fisheries. So I'm wrapping it up now, going to get ready for questions. I went over a little bit, but there is hope. We had over 100 species of sharks, including the blue shark, which is one of the most fished sharks in the open ocean under the Convention of International Trade of Endangered Species. This is primarily to regulate trade of shark fins to Asia, which is one of the largest drivers still of shark mortality, despite bans on shark finning for almost 20 years in the US. But there are loopholes in some of these regional fisheries management organizations like ITAC, or ICAT, sorry, the International Commission of Atlantic Tunas, which failed to close the loophole. You can read about that on our website under news. I just wrote an article, as well as what apex predators really are. So here's how you can help us. We do a lot of activities, including Sharktober, where we celebrate sharks with our sanctuary, but I won't talk about that. That was before my injury, and I missed my last talk, sorry. But we're going to do a Marine Protected Film Day on films, not only on marine protected areas here in California, but also in Baja and Hawaii. I encourage you to join us at the Bay Model, December 7th. It's free. It's also for Spanish speakers. And we'll be having a photo show, and it's how you can learn about what our marine protected areas are off our coast, and how you can engage as a community scientist. I teach a class at the College of Marin. It just ended, but I will be teaching it again next fall on marine protected areas and protecting marine life and wildlife off of our coastline. Thanks for listening. You could buy a book online for your kids for the holidays. And I need to thank my grantors and sponsors, but especially Bay Nature for hosting my talk. Thank you. Now I'll answer questions.
Thank you so much, David. And to answer, Karina, your question just now, yes, this is recorded, and everyone who registered will get a link to the recording in a few days after this presentation wraps up. But for the sake of time, I'll just read people's questions out. I think our first question was from Daniel. Daniel, who lives near Bodega Bay, was wondering, near Bodega Bay, how often are sharks found in the near shore areas, and what kind are there near Bodega Bay?
A lot. There was a fairly large angel shark population there. There's a marine canyon there, submarine canyon. White sharks frequent the Russian River mouth, as well as Salmon Creek. Salmon sharks are there because of, well, there used to be a lot more salmon, another climate and habitat loss issue. Leopard sharks are there, particularly the Albion River up in that area in Mendocino. So almost all the sharks that I showed you are up there in that Bodega Bay area.
Mm. Awesome. Thank you. And thank you for your question, Daniel. Eugene was wondering about we would love to see a shark. What do they look like? I think to generalize the question, maybe where are places that people can go on their own and see sharks around the Bay Area?
Well, we're hoping to make Aquatic Park a shark park. The water, like right now, I'm a rower paddler. I'm also an open water swimmer, and I'd like to swim in it if the water was cleaner. But you can see them in the near shore foraging, particularly in the summer months. The leopard shark females come into the shallows to gestate because
Mm,
they give live birth. And so they will come into shallow waters near some of the wetlands. Richardson's Bay is a really good spot. The Tiburon Peninsula was named by the Spanish after so many sharks. La Jolla down off San Diego in the summer is a really great spot to go and see leopard sharks near shore, as well as if you're a diver, seven gill sharks and soupfin sharks in the kelp beds. That will be a chapter in our new book, Where to See a Shark. And of course, if you're a scuba diver, you have a chance at seeing sharks sometimes. And then we do our trips in Sharktober off the Farallones where we see them at the surface. We
mm.
don't attract them, but we do see them when they're out there foraging.
Awesome. Thank you. And we have a question from Mel that was specifically about horn sharks. Mel was wondering how many come in one litter and are they cannibalistic in the womb?
Horn sharks,
Hmm.
so they don't have litters, they lay eggs. And they actually, in optimal conditions, can have several laying events in a year. Um, as far as how many they lay one at a time, but over a period of time, I don't know. But I would doubt if they have any more than 6 to 8 egg events because, again, they are nurturing them. They're coming down the uterus through the cloaca, and so there's not a lot of room in a horn shark for a lot of horn shark babies. But I cannot tell you specifically how many in their egg laying events that they lay. But there's certainly not like a salmon that's spawning thousands of eggs,
Hmm.
but one at a time. So they're not they don't have litters.
Gotcha. Thank you. Rick was wondering, do great white sharks prey on sea otters or do they just bite them and spit them out? Rick said, I understand that the return of great whites has truncated the northern and southern limits of California's sea otter range.
I'm not certain that it's truncated the limits, but they certainly have been more observations of sea otters washed ashore with penetrations from a white shark. Uh, it's sort of like the difference between eating a sausage or a piece of jerky, because it's the blubber that the white sharks want, that all of that calorie rich fat that the pinnipeds have that the otarids don't. And so, or mustelids. So the otters, of course, are warmed by their thick fur, and so we think it's again mistaken identity, and they spit them out. So it's spitting out like a fur ball. And there have been an increase, and my understanding is this is more in the middle of the otter range. I would doubt that an adult white shark would even bother on a sea otter, and they would swallow it whole. So again, we believe that these are subadult sharks. Possibly a shift in range of the shark itself is increasing the predation, and that's probably what's happening. Are they limiting the northernmost range of the otter? Uh, I don't think so, but I believe it's some of that. The humans don't want to see an extension of the northern range. There's been discussion of reintroducing them into the San Francisco Bay and into the sanctuary, which is not highly received by fishermen, particularly. Well, you can't fish abalone commercially anymore. The urchins aren't so healthy either, but they would benefit by those urchins off of Mendocino Sonoma being consumed by sea otters, but they are voracious. Um, but anyway, to get to your point, there have been an increased predation event, which is concerning because the southern sea otter is endangered. They're only around 3,000. They're actually less because of this interactions. And again, we think it's happening more northerly because of the sea surface temperatures and shift in range of the predator.
Thank you. And thank you, Rick, for your question. Let's see. Daniel had a question. It is the 1 p.m., but we're just going to do a real quick lightning round of the last few questions. Daniel, you had asked, what is the best treatment for the sting of a stingray or bat ray?
Good questions. Uh, I grew up in Southern California, and my mother lives down. It's called Los Alamitos. They call it Ray Bay, and not coincidentally, it's where all the juvenile white sharks are. And I know the lifeguards, and they actually will drive right up and tap out the hot water. They have a bag that has a stingray on it, and you put your foot in it because it is a protein-based venom, and it denatures through heat.
Mm.
And they treat hundreds in Southern California. So there's something called the stingray shuffle if you're a surfer in warmer waters. We have less of that issue here, but you can in some of the embayments, and you shuffle your feet and it disturbs them, the cloud, and they'll swim out of your way because you don't want to step right on them because they'll whip back. And it's very painful. I have been stung. And yeah, so heat is the best treatment right away.
Mm, thank you. And we had a couple questions from Eugene. One was, you said we don't see juvenile great whites in the Bay Area. Where do the juveniles live? And the other question was, the public is able to join you on shark trips in October. Is that true? That's so exciting.
Juvenile sharks typically are confined by that thermal range with the upper range around 55 degrees centigrade, maybe 58 at the top, and then they prefer to stay in cooler waters, but limited to maybe 52 at the bottom end. So they have a very select thermal range. So that's primarily in Southern California and Baja, down to the Sea of Cortez, where they're born. Again, we've seen this shift, and if we have these unseasonably high, as much as 6 degrees in these areas of Monterey Bay, and maybe someday the San Francisco Bay, we're going to see more juveniles moving north. Right now, is this a short-lived phenomena? Will those juveniles grow up to adults and then there will not be replaced? Right now, we've not seen any sharks born. We've never witnessed a white shark being born at all, but we know by observations of their young, which are fairly large, 4 to 6 feet. It's a big baby. We don't see them north. To join us on our trips, and they're not shark trips, they're wildlife trips, they're sanctuary experiences. We talk about marine protection. We see sharks. I talk about sharks the whole trip. We see thresher sharks, we see salmon sharks, blue sharks sometimes, and sometimes we see a predation event. I only lead about 4 or 5 a year, September through October, out to the Farallones, and those are public trips. I also go out there other times, but those are our educational, and they're whale watch trips. We see so many whales, and including identifying whales through Happy Whale Now, through photo ID. And I mentioned the sharks. We do that with the undersight of flukes. And sadly, we identified a whale for the first time in our trip in 2023. It was seen in Baja. It was seen in Monterey Bay several times. And we believe it got hit by a ship and washed up off Fitzgerald Marine Reserve this year. And so we're also logging where these whales are on our trip. So it's community science, and we give that information to Happy Whale, and that information is also shared with the sanctuary as well as vessel traffic control, because there's a lot of interaction among humpback whales in particular and shipping coming into the San Francisco Bay.
Mm,
So that's a way that people can get involved and provide data and hands-on conservation and get out on the water. So watch for us next September.
awesome. Thank you so much. The last question we'll do really, really fast is that question about coral bleaching, the impacts of coral bleaching on the presence of reef sharks, and what the impacts there are, and how it seems like reef sharks are disappearing from some of the reef habitats from Mel.
Yeah, well, you've got a very astute audience here. We also have a project in the Coral Triangle in Indonesia, and coast sea surface temperatures again are causing massive bleaching events, including the Great Barrier Reef uh, and Hawaii even. Uh, these bleaching events are because of high sea surface temperatures that expel the zooxanthellae, the symbiont. Um, and reef sharks, of course, are the patrolmen or patrolwomen of the reef. They are the apex predators. And there was a survey that we participated in that looked at, they're called baited remote underwater video. You basically put a piece of bait on a camera with a tripod. We hope to do this in the bay in aquatic park, and it attracts sharks, and you're able to identify them. That study showed that 20% of reef sharks that had been identified on reef surveyed were absent. And that's just through a remote survey. There is more direct evidence in other areas. This is alarming because they are critically important for the balance and health of marine ecosystems. We're seeing a shift from pelagic shark fisheries, finning and fins, to nearshore shark fisheries. And because of that value for shark fin, to make shark fin soup. And reef sharks in particular are highly valued because of the cartilage in their fin, and they're fairly easy to catch because they're near shore. So again, coming into like fisheries protection, they're hard to enforce. In the US, we have good fisheries management rules and enforcement, but it's still difficult. In other areas, like the Philippines, there's almost no enforcement. And I think the best way to protect them is to have a bunch of divers and local people who are practicing ecotourism and also acting as the watch keepers of their reef. That includes the sharks. And we know this firsthand from our expedition with the Cal Academy in the biodiversity expedition, that the only reefs in the Philippines that we saw sharks, reef sharks, were the ones that were marine protected areas by the local community, besides the deep sea shark that Dr. McCosser described. So, so either in the deep sea where it's hard to kill them, or you got people living right there who care, and maybe even having alternative livelihood through tourism, through diving, and benefits of the services that sharks provide.
Mm. Thank you. I think that's a great place to wrap up. Yeah, I really appreciate you, David, for sharing your expertise with us today. And I really appreciate everyone on the call for joining us. If we can all unmute and just say thank you as a group to David for sharing his time with us, I think that'd be great. I'll count us off for like, I'll go 3, 2, 1. At one, after one, we can all say thank you. But thank you all for joining again. If you're interested in more events, please consider joining as a member. We have discounted rates and free tickets for events if you're a member, and just continue to show up. I love seeing you all at all of our events. So thank you so much for your support of Bay Nature and for what David does with Shark Stewards. So, okay, 3, 2, 1.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
David.
Thank you.
Yay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all for
Thank
joining,
you. I
and
see some
David.
friends, Medea and Karina. Great
cool.
group. Thank you very
Great to
much.
see you all, and hope to see you at a future event soon. And I'll send you out the recording of today's talk in a few days. But thank you, David, and thank you everybody for joining.
Thank you.
Thank
See you
you.
in the water.
Thank you.
Okay.